From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Featured on today's edition, highlights in hog production research presented at the recent K-State Swine Day. First, we'll hear from K-State's Madie Wensley and Mike Tokach as they'll talk about their findings on feeding approaches to improve young pig survivability right after weaning. Then, K-State's Bo Williams and Jordan Gebhardt will talk about their study of the effects of increasing lysine in late nursery and growing pig diets, while at the same time reducing the level of soybean meal in those diets. They found that these adjustments can result in greater cost efficiency in feeding those young pigs. And awaiting with another Stop, Look, and Listen, K-State's Gus van Der Hoeven. All that right here on Agriculture Today. You're listening to Agriculture Today. As always, we're glad to have you aboard. And we'll devote the better part of today's broadcast looking back at swine production and management research, which was covered at the recent Swine Day here at Kansas State University. At that event, they set aside considerable time to have the graduate researchers working with the swine research team here at the university talk about their current work. And today, we'll pass along the findings that they've come up with in various areas. Joining us now is K-State swine specialist Mike Tokach and graduate researcher Madie Wensley to talk about what she's been exploring, Mike, and largely it's about pig survivability in the nursery and the post-weaning phase. Is that correct?
Yes, Eric. We have a project that we're doing with Iowa State University and Purdue that Kansas State has partnered with them that's funded by the National Pork Board and the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research. This is a 5-year project where our overall goal is to reduce the mortality that we see in the swine industry. The major area where we lose pigs in commercial production is in the farrowing house, early after the pigs are born, and then in that early post-weaning phase. And so Madie's work has really been focused on that transition, is how do you prepare that pig before weaning, and then how do you get them to eat feed and keep them eating feed and not have some of the problems that we sometimes run into in the early nursery stages.
Very good. Let's bring Madie in here. Generally, before we dig into the particular projects you're looking at, what are the variables that are key in looking at here as far as that pig performance, but moreover survivability?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's one as an industry we need to continue to develop. Because when we talk about survivability, it's more than just the normal feed intake, average daily gain, feed efficiency. We start to think about what's the fallout rate of pigs. So what are the pigs that are removed from general population because they're sick or starting to fall behind because they're not eating. And then you, of course, with that have mortality rates. So the pigs that don't end up making it to the end of the nursery and then marketing as a full value pig. So what it comes down to is, especially when we start to look at survivability, is getting into commercial barns that have really large population of pigs, because when it comes to research, we need those large populations of pigs in order to successfully track mortality and those fallout rates.
Before we go any further, the acuteness of the problem as far as mortality, fallout rates, for those not acquainted that directly with the swine industry, how critical is this problem?
It's extremely important, and you can look at it a number of different ways to understand the importance of it. Probably the easiest one is the biggest difference separating the highest profitable farms and the lowest profitability farms is the mortality rate differences between those different systems. And when we look at the pigs that are born into a farm, we lose a portion of those in the farrowing house and then a portion in the nursery and the finisher. And this is an area that, because of some of the disease problems that we've had, similar to what we've seen some on the human side, we've seen some of these influx of new diseases and foreign animal diseases that aren't diseases that we normally think about as being a concern for our export market, but are a very big issue for us in terms of raising pigs on the farm. And so, again, probably the biggest thing, the way to express the difference is that the profitability of production systems is largely determined on the percentage of pigs that they can get to market of those that are born on the farm.
Then, Madie, you have tackled an important area to study. Let's talk about a couple of these projects that you have been working on and have completed here. Floor feeding those pigs in the farrowing area with a creep feed. expand on that, if you would.
Yeah, so creep feeding is a common strategy that is well established to acclimate pigs to solid feed prior to weaning and then encourage earlier feed intake after weaning. But with that, there's labor challenges because creep feeders require cleaning between each farrowing group. And when you have a lot of pigs that you're farrowing out, there's not always time to get those cleaned. So the concept with this study was, can we still creep feed, but instead of using a feeder, can we do it on the floor of farrowing stalls? And then have see an effect on nursery growth, performance, feed intake. For this trial, we collaborated with a company with Holden Farms, and we floor-fed creep feed for 4 days in the farrowing house prior to pigs being weaned. And we had 4 treatments, so we looked at providing no creep feed to a number of litters, and then there was a subset of litters in which we provided either a large pellet creep feed, a small pellet creep feed, and then the sow lactation feed, which is in meal form. And then when those pigs were weaned, they were penned together with other pigs that had received the same kind of creep feed as them during farrowing, and then we tracked growth performance, removal rates, and mortality. And so with that study, what we found was that pigs that were provided large pelleted creep feed had a significant reduction in removals and mortalities compared to particularly the pigs that had received sow lactation feed as their form of creep.
So that's an important discovery
Yeah.
in as far as particularly the mortality reduction then.
Yes, absolutely. And it also is helpful for producers to understand that they can still have an impact on those pigs after weaning if they floor feed, creep feed, as opposed to using those feeders.
Mike?
I was going to say another area that the creep feed kind of ties into, and Madie's done a lot of work on sensory attractants, is how do you get those pigs attracted to a food before they're weaned and then get them to also eat that feed after weaning. And so, Madie, you may want to explain just a little bit about the sensory attractant side of some of your research.
Yeah, so the sensory attractant side is, I don't want to say new, it's been around, but I think it's something that has piqued our interest in the industry. And the whole concept is that we encourage these young pigs to use their senses and interact with the environment around them. And so we've conducted 3 studies at Kansas State looking at different sensory attractants, either in a spray form, a powdered form, or an enrichment cube form, in which we provided that attractant pre-weaning to pigs while they were still suckling on the sow, and then we reintroduced that same attractant post-weaning after they had been weaned. And the goal is that they have a flavor, smell association, object association with that attractant, which would then reduce their stress levels, encourage them to go out, explore their pen, interact with the feeder, and begin consuming feed sooner. And so with all of those trials, we weren't able to impact growth performance, and we had too small of a population to track removals and mortalities. But what we did find is that we can successfully reduce the percentage of pigs that lose weight after weaning by providing those different attractants.
Interesting. There's yet another companion study, and this was back to the surface on which you're feeding, mat feeding. Talk about that aspect, why you were interested in that feed presentation alternative.
Yeah, so mat feeding is another common strategy used in the industry, but there's not a whole lot of research backing up the protocols that are being used on the farm. And so this was a series of studies that we were both interested in, and the production system that we worked in were interested for themselves. So it fit really nicely. And so the whole concept here is that we provide, after these pigs have been weaned, there is a mat on the floor, and so we provide solid feed, either pulled from a cart in the alleyway or out of the back of the feeders in the nursery pens, and we put that feed onto the mat in the nursery pen, and this is in addition to the feed that's found in their feeder. And the whole goal here is to just increase, one, the fact that you're getting in and out of the pen more, so you have your eyes on pigs more, but also you're increasing feed accessibility. So they're seeing you take feed, put it on the floor, and they are getting encouraged to get up and go see what that feed's all about. And hopefully it will ease that transition from going from an all milk-based diet on the sow to now an all solid diet.
Now, what did you find resulting as far as the gains of those pigs using that approach of providing feed?
Yeah, so as far as growth performance, again, we didn't see much of a response, but that was as to be expected. With this, our goal is to look at survivability. So what we did find is in all 3 studies, just looking at removal rates and mortality, is that pens of pigs that were provided the mat feed 3 times a day for 10 days post-placement, there was a significant reduction in removal mortality rates compared to pens that did not receive the mat feed.
Mike, when we look at all of this, then it gets back to that overarching theme of reducing pig mortality and removals and improving that survivability. The work that Madie's doing here would seem to uncover some things that'll help in that cause.
Yes, I think it all ties together, and Madie had also done some reviews for us before she set out on these experiments, where she found that certainly some of the biggest things that we can do to impact mortality is increasing weaning age is a good example. Will reduce mortality in the post-weaning period, so we can get pigs up to 24, 25 days of age before weaning. Providing creep feeding, as you talked about, the mat feeding, both of those have been shown to reduce mortality and improve livability after weaning. And so putting some of these things into practice and then combining some of the things we've learned on the creep feeding with some of the sensory aspects, I think really help us to target the needs of that pig more closely than what we've been able to in the past.
Well, great work here, Madie. You have come up with these findings that will help address a key issue in pig production at that nursery and post-weaning level. So congratulations on that, and good luck with your future work here at K-State. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Mike, thank you likewise.
Thank you, Eric.
And again, they highlighted this work at the recent Swine Day here at Kansas State University on pig survivability and some feeding approaches that can lend to that. Madie Wensley, graduate researcher, Mike Tokach, research and extension swine specialist. And we'll have more research highlights from that very Swine Day for you. After you hear this, this is Agriculture Today. We're back now on this Agriculture Today, and once more, as promised, we have more information that was conveyed at the recent K-State Swine Day here at Kansas State University. Loads of research going on each and every year, and a number of the graduate researchers who largely steer that research step up and share what they found out in their various areas. And here's another angle on that. We're joined by Jordan Gebhardt, who is a swine veterinarian at K-State, specializing in a number of areas, but certainly in nutrition, and a graduate researcher, Bo Williams, who is working with feed-grade amino acids as part of the growing pig diet. Before we get into all of that, Jordan, this is just one of a variety of research trials ongoing in the area of pig growth enhancement here at K-State, is it not?
That's right. Our program here at Kansas State is very robust. We've got a great group of graduate students and faculty members that help conduct research in this area. Really, how can we help maintain the health of animals, but also improve the way that we feed those animals, make them grow as efficient and as rapidly as we can? And at the end of the day, our primary goal is making a product for the consumer, for them to take home from the store and put on their table for their family. So as mentioned, our Swine Day we had recently here in Manhattan, we had a number of different research trials where we presented results for the industry and producers as well as allied industry supporters, and highlighted and outlined a number of different key areas, and some of the work that we'll talk about here today focusing specifically on amino acids and lysine usage, but also a number of different areas of feeding management practices for sows, nursery, as well as growing and finishing pigs.
A lot of moving parts here within the realm of this research, but Bo, many that you actually have a hand in. The one we'll focus on right here, the use of these feed-grade amino acids in those pig diets. Define for the layperson what we're talking about. What is an amino acid in the context of swine nutrition?
Yep, so amino acids are feed-grade amino acids, can be added in the diet to help meet the requirements for those pigs. Lysine being the first limiting amino acid for swine. You always want to set your diet so you hit that requirement for that age of pig, and then follow up and hit all the other amino acids after that, other ones being methionine, tryptophan, isoleucine, valine. So once you get those amino acids set, then everything else after that seems pretty simple. So going into a little bit of my research, I did a nursery study that looked at decreasing the amount of soybean meal in the diet, which in most pig diets, soybean meal is the ingredient that you use to bring in those amino acids into your diets. And we wanted to reduce the amount of soybean meal in the diets by increasing the amount of synthetic lysine in those diets as well. So as we decreased soybean meal, we increased synthetic lysine in the diet. And we found that as we increase the amount of synthetic lysine up until a point, being roughly 24% of SID intact protein proportion to the amount of feed grade lysine in the diet, you see an improvement in gain and feed efficiency. But if you increase further than that, you start to reduce that improvement that you see earlier on.
So it plateaus.
Yep.
In other words, there's a limit, so to
Yep,
speak.
you start to increase, plateau, and then before long you'll start to decrease because you'll start to lose the crude protein of the diet will start to reduce too much based on synthetics not bringing in any crude protein into the diet, but just feed-grade pure amino acids.
The central incentive here seems to be, though, the efficiency gained and therefore the potential and economic savings by reducing the soy meal ratio?
So reducing the amount of soybean meal in the diet. So if we can reduce the amount of soybean meal in the diet and add in synthetic amino acids, which come at a cheaper cost, we're ultimately getting roughly the same performance as we would with the increased soybean meal at a cheaper cost.
The economics to be studied, though, more definitively here, but that is the strong presumption as far as the gains,
yes,
economically speaking. Remind again, if you would, Bo, about the stage of growth at which you introduce this substitution and bring that soy meal percentage down.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of research over the past 20, 30 years looking at amino acids throughout all stages of production, but what we wanted to focus on is kind of that nursery moving into grower phase. So my study was conducted from 25 pounds to roughly 75 pounds body weight.
Jordan, this seems to be rather straightforward in its benefit for producers, using lysine as an amino acid, substituting for soy meal. What's the future of this, do you think?
Yeah, and certainly that's an area that we've continue to improve our knowledge base over time on how to best feed pigs and do it efficiently and do it with the best economic outcomes for the producer. We've largely shifted towards feeding fewer intact proteins that would come in the form of soybean meal or other protein source and supplying the specific amino acids or the building blocks of those proteins more closely to match the need of those pigs. So over time, as we've learned how to do that better, we come to a lot of different complex interactions between amino acids. And Bo had mentioned branch chain amino acids, and we won't get into much detail there, but that gets into some interactions between leucine as well as some other amino acids, isoleucine and valine. There's a complex interaction in the way that those nutrients and amino acids are metabolized and utilized. So as we learn more about feeding the specific amino acids, we've learned a lot and came a long way, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And largely, over time, we've been able to do that better and more efficiently. But actually, right now, it's somewhat interesting that with some of the supply limitations and some of the challenges there, actually right now, the supply of feed-grade amino acid, or L-lysine, is actually quite limited for many producers here in the state of Kansas as well as elsewhere in the Midwest and U.S. That much of that feed-grade lysine is produced in Asia, and there with the supply limitations and some of the challenges with getting those products over to the U.S., the price of feed-grade lysine is actually increased substantially, in some cases 2 to 3 times. Today's price is 2 to 3 times what it was just several months ago. So with Bo's data would indicate that when economics are positive in that sense, increasing lysine usage can be beneficial. But actually today we're interacting with many producers and actually going backwards based on the supply and demand dynamics for that feed-grade amino acid today, in the sense that we're being very conservative with our usage of L-lysine to make sure that we can get through and we don't run out. There's a very few very important areas where we do need to retain that ingredient for use. Largely those are in our lactation diets as well as our very early nursery pig diets. So making sure that we can serve L-lysine to be able to continue to use in those diets allows us to reduce usage in some of those other areas to conserve for that area.
But just to follow up briefly on that, given the supply issue, Bo, is the presumption that the other amino acids, at least for the short duration, could serve the same purpose that the L-lysine will serve in this capacity?
Yeah, so going off that, you always want to make sure that you have enough lysine in the diet. So making sure we're hitting that SID lysine or standardized allele digestible lysine requirement for that pig is key. So making sure we can hit that first and then worrying about the other amino acids after that. So if you're limiting on lysine, you're going to see a dip in performance quicker than you would if you're limiting in other amino acids.
Have to ask this, looking a little further down the productivity line of a given hog. Will this substitution make a big difference at all in eventual gain, end weight, and so forth? Or is it just sustaining what that hog can do otherwise?
Yeah, so in terms of using feed-grade amino acids, taking the pigs all the way to the same market weight, there's no reduction in growth throughout the whole stages of life for that pig. So ultimately, you'll be getting the same end product at the same weight using feed-grade amino acids.
All in all, Jordan, it sounds like confirmation of the value of lysine in this capacity then.
Absolutely, and we've continued to, even prior to me starting my career 10, 15 years ago, it was available as a feed ingredient, but much more limited use. However, as we've continued to learn more about those interactions between amino acids, increasing our access and use of L-lysine when it is economically beneficial and we can have adequate supply, certainly is where I see the industry moving forward as an industry.
Very well. Bo, before we let the two of you go, you've other research on your plate here while you continue your studies at K-State, right?
Yes. So along with some of the amino acid work that I've been covering over the last year of my PhD, I've also been looking at bone mineralization within lame pigs, so looking calcium, phosphorus, vitamin D, so kind of getting away from the amino acids and looking at more minerals within lame pigs post nursery and grow finish.
That ought to open up some new research vistas for you for sure.
Yep. Oh, yeah, most definitely.
Jordan, good work continues here at K-State in swine nutrition. You keep the momentum going as a team here, don't you?
Absolutely. Fortunate to be part of a terrific team, the faculty that we have here on campus, and very much thank all the graduate students, Bo, and the other students for all the hard work that they do and make this possible. It's a joy to be a part of.
Well, keep it up, and thanks to the both of you for a quick glimpse to this specific research that Bo has been overseeing here at K-State, and appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With us, Jordan Gebhardt, swine veterinarian at K-State and a graduate researcher in the swine nutrition program here at the University, Bo Williams. And they reported on this work using feed-grade amino acids as a complement to the growing pig ration in substitute for soy meal and the benefits of that switch out. They talked about that at the Swine Day 2021 at Kansas State University several days back here on the campus. And we'll be back with more for you on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
It's interesting to know what your limits are.
That's Gus van Der Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
It's interesting to know what your limits are. I'm talking about capabilities and dreams. The fact that we now know that I was dyslexic undoubtedly had early limitations. No one knew when I was a child what it was, and why my learning curve and learning pattern was not as easy. Apparently my writing was not easy to read, as I would drop the vowels. As you grow older, you adapt, and looking back, you overcome. The other learning difficulty was memorization. Being stubborn has helped me. As I read and go through the daily routine, a routine I try hard not to make a dull routine, I sometimes reflect on what other professions or work I would have liked to do, or I could have done. I would have loved and enjoyed working with horses. Anneke sometimes says I would have made a good veterinarian. Maybe, but for all the names of the bones to know? I do know this. Chemistry was not an easy subject for me. I do not want to blame the instructors, because other students seem to learn it quite easily. I still get nightmares of memorizing the big chart with the elements. Yet what does fascinate me is the world of medicinal plants. It's a huge subject and a very old knowledge, and to be really knowledgeable in that field seems to me to be a great gift. I pulled a few books I have on the subject. Of course, what I call a great gift can be obtained by serious studying and learning. In the past, people like the herbalist knew and knowledge was passed on. Gathering herbs to eat and medicinal plants was a serious matter. Today, we drive to the pharmacy and pay for what we need to treat what ails us. That there was great interest among the early plant explorers we know, as cloisters and the universities set aside special medicinal and herb gardens. The Dutch University in Leiden had an herb and medicinal garden already well established in 1617, and that was 3 years before the Pilgrims came across the Atlantic. I flipped through pages of one of my books. I stopped at yarrow. It's a plant we grow as an ornamental. Its color is white, yellow, pink, and purple, but it occurs also in the wild as a gray plant. I've not tried it, but it was used to stop bleeding. I ought to remember that the next time I swing the chainsaw on the farm. Other benefits are as a tonic, a stimulant, and for, or rather against, feverish colds. The whole plant is collected and hung by the stalk to dry. Another interest I have is beekeeping, to just collect and eat honey of your own hives collected off your land. There's so much to be interested in. I need another life, but I know that's asking for too much. My life has been very interesting, but getting older makes it fascinating to talk with today's young people and listen to their hopes and dreams. I think of my grand and great-grandchildren. What will they see?
Gus van Der Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. That'll do it for this Wednesday edition. Thanks for being along with us. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.